Hi everyone, I'm Corey Jarrell, WeCJ, and welcome to Commander Class. In today's class we will be talking about bounce lands. The reason they're called bounce lands is because when you play it, part of the circumstance on the card is you have to return another land that is on your side of the field back to your hand. You are bouncing a land back to your hand. Majority of bounce lands into the field tapped, but they also tap for 2 mana instead of 1, and that's where it benefits you because it pretty much guarantees that you get a land drop next turn unless you have to discard or do something like that when it comes to getting rid of lands in your hand. When it comes to bounce lands, there's a very cool thing that you can do that took me years of playing Magic the Gathering to know. So at the very end of the video, I will explain to you the cool thing that you can do with bounce lands that not many, like if you're a veteran player or been playing a while, you know. However, there's a lot of people that I've talked to that didn't know this was possible until I talked to them about it or until it was mentioned. A lot of people do know, but a lot of people don't. But the main benefit of bounce lands is that it cleans up your board a little bit and you return a land to your hand, which means on your next turn you're guaranteed to play a land unless there's a circumstance that proves that wrong. So when it comes to bounce lands, there is two versions of them. There is the Vision Cycle, and they tap for a colourless and one of the 5 colours. There's a total of 5. And then there is the Ravnica ones, that there is 11 in total. They are all to do with the guilds. So there's 5 allied, 5 enemies, and then there is 1 colourless one. So the first ones I'll be going over are the Vision Cycle. There is a total of 5, as I said before. There is one of each colour in WUBRG, and they tap for a colourless or a waste and the whatever colour mana you play. And the kind of circumstance when it comes to this is you have to return a untapped land of the same colour that the land produces. So for example, if you have the colourless or waste and the white one, you have to return a untapped plains to your hand. And now the reason I have to say untapped is because it is very, I've seen a lot of players will tap it to get a mana to then play, return the plains, and under the circumstance and the rules, that is not liable. Because of that reason, these lands are very rarely played and they're not really reprinted anymore. They're kind of seen as the worst version of the bounce lands, what I've seen when people discuss this. So I will be going over them all now, all 5 of them, and here they are on screen now. Karoo. It's a land that's an uncommon. Karoo enters the battlefield tapped. When Karoo enters the battlefield, sacrifice it unless you return a untapped plains you control to its owner's hand, and it taps for 1 and a white. Coral Atoll. It's a land that's an uncommon. Coral Atoll enters the battlefield tapped. When Coral Atoll enters the battlefield, sacrifice it unless you return a untapped island you control to its owner's hand, and it taps for 1 and a blue. Everglades. It's a land that's an uncommon. Everglade enters the battlefield tapped. When Everglades enters the battlefield, sacrifice it unless you return a untapped swamp you control to its owner's hand, and it taps for 1 and a black. Dormant Volcano. It's a land that's an uncommon. Dormant Volcano enters the battlefield tapped. When Dormant Volcano enters the battlefield, sacrifice it unless you return a untapped mountain you control to its owner's hand, and it taps for 1 and a red. Jungle Basin. It's a land that's an uncommon. Jungle Basin enters the battlefield tapped. When Jungle Basin enters the battlefield, sacrifice it unless you return a untapped forest you control to its owner's hand, and it taps for 1 and a green. The next section I'll be talking about is the Ravnica block. When it comes to this section, I will go over all the allied, then the enemies, and then I will go over the colourless one. The reason these are really good is because they tap for the guild your deck represents, and they tap for 2 colours instead of colours in the waste. The main reason these ones are used is because you just have to return a land to your hand. It doesn't matter what land it is, and that's the reason that these are beneficial. The only hard thing about this is you cannot play them in monocolored decks. So the first ones I'll be going over are the allied bounce lands, and they will be on screen now. Azorius Chancery. It's a land that's an uncommon. Azorius Chancery enters the battlefield tapped. When Azorius Chancery enters the battlefield, return a land you control to its owner's hand, and it taps for a white and blue. Dimir Aqueduct. It's a land that's an uncommon. Dimir Aqueduct enters the battlefield tapped. When Dimir Aqueduct enters the battlefield, return a land you control to its owner's hand, and it taps for a blue and black. Rakdos Carnarium. It's a land that's an uncommon. Rakdos Carnarium enters the battlefield tapped. When Rakdos Carnarium enters the battlefield, return a land you control to its owner's hand, and it taps for a black and red. Gruul Turf. It's a land that's an uncommon. Gruul Turf enters the battlefield tapped. When Gruul Turf enters the battlefield, return a land card you control to its owner's hand, and it taps for a red and green. Selesnya Sanctuary. It is a land that's an uncommon. Selesnya Sanctuary enters the battlefield tapped. When Selesnya Sanctuary enters the battlefield, return a land you control to its owner's hand, and it taps for a green and white. And now the next ones I'll be going over are the 5 enemy guilds, and they will be on screen now. Ozoth Basilica. It's a land that's an uncommon. Ozoth Basilica enters the battlefield tapped. When Ozoth Basilica enters the battlefield, return a land you control to its owner's hand, and it taps for a white and black. Izzet Boilerworks. It's a land that's an uncommon. Izzet Boilerworks enters the battlefield tapped. When Izzet Boilerworks enters the battlefield, return a land you control to its owner's hand, and it taps for a blue or red. Gilgari Rot Farm. It is a land that's an uncommon. Gilgari Rot Farm enters the battlefield tapped. When Gilgari Rot Farm enters the battlefield, return a land you control to its owner's hand, and it taps for a black and green. Boros Garrison. It's a land that's an uncommon. Boros Garrison enters the battlefield tapped. When Boros Garrison enters the battlefield, return a land you control to its owner's hand, and it taps for a red and white. Simic Growth Chamber. It's a land that's an uncommon. Simic Growth Chamber enters the battlefield tapped. When Simic Growth Chamber enters the battlefield, return a land you control to its owner's hand, and it taps for a green-blue. And then the single one, the colourless one, is one of my kind of favourite lands when it comes to these bounce lands, because you can pretty much put them in any deck. And this is why I absolutely love this card, so it will be on screen now. Guildless Commons. It's a land that's an uncommon. Guildless Commons enters the battlefield tapped. When Guildless Commons enters the battlefield, return a land you control to its owner's hand, and it taps for a double waste or colourless. So at the start of this video, I did say that there is a cool thing you can do. However, when it comes to that thing, you have to have a certain type of deck and have certain cards on the field. So if you have a landfall deck, and for the people that don't know what landfall is, it is an ability that whenever you play a land, it triggers. So for example, if it says landfall, you gain 1 life. Every time you play a land, you gain 1 life. So with bounce lands, if you have a way to be able to play as many lands as you can on your turn, where there's cards that let you untap creatures, there's cards that let you tap creatures and play a land, so you get to tap the creature, play the land, untap the creature because you played the land, and then return the land to your hand. And this is why bounce lands are really good, because the dual ones trigger themselves. So for example, if you have a creature that you tap and you get to play a land, and you also have a card that whenever you play a land, you untap a creature, that gives you infinite landfall. So that means you can play, as long as you have a land in your hand, you're allowed to play that land. Now when it comes to these bounce lands, you can play it, it enters tapped, but to keep it on the field, you have to return a land to your hand. The land you can pick is the dual land, or the dual bounce land itself, so you just return it, and then play it again, and then return it, so you have infinite landfall. But now we're coming to the end of the video, because that is everything I know about bounce lands, and in next week's class we'll be going on to fetch lands, which are one of the most expensive lands, but the most played and kind of the best cards, land cards, when it comes to having lands in general. But as always, remember to like, subscribe, follow, comment, follow me on all my social media, share this around if you're in any Magic groups, or if you have a player or have a friend that's new to Magic the Gathering, please share Commander Class to them. I've also started a Patreon for people to help out with equipment and lighting and stuff, and I've started a Discord where people can join if you join the Patreon, and that helps a load. My channel is still growing, but I'm still trying to get it to grow faster, but I've appreciated and absolutely love the friendliness and love and the people I've talked to online for the last few weeks of me doing this. But as always, when it comes to this, I will see you in the next video. And if you like this video, last week we talked about gates, and that will be on the screen now. If you want to learn more about Magic the Gathering and lands and stuff like that, there is a playlist underneath with all the Commander classes on it, and I recommend going and having a look at them.